Relax. No one's showing up. Those were the exact words on my phone screen, glowing cold and sharp in my hand, just 7 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. For a second, my brain refused to accept them. I stood frozen in the narrow bridal prep room behind the lakeside lodge, the hum of a curling iron buzzing somewhere behind me, the smell of hairspray thick in the air. One of my heels was on, the other sat abandoned near the door. My bouquet lay on the counter beside an open lipstick, its cap rolling slowly like the world had tilted. I reread the message. Once. Twice. Then my phone buzzed again. My sister. We're all at my engagement brunch instead. Don't make this dramatic. Engagement brunch. My heart dropped so fast it felt physical, like something tearing loose inside my chest. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even move. I just stared at my reflection in the mirror. Hair half done, veil clipped crooked, eyes wide and confused, trying to understand how my wedding day had somehow become a scheduling conflict. Then came the third message. Mom, by the way, I used your credit card for the deposit here. It was easier. You can sort it out later. I felt something go very still inside me. I typed back one word. Okay. Not because I was okay, but because I finally understood. Let me rewind. My name is Naomi Keller. I'm 35 years old, and for most of my life, I've been the reliable one. The fixer. The backup plan. I work as an operations manager for a logistics company. Unsexy, invisible work that only gets noticed when something breaks. I'm good at it. I'm calm under pressure. I solve problems quietly and move on. That role didn't start at work. It started in my family. My younger sister, Lila, has always been the event. She doesn't enter rooms, she arrives. Big energy, bigger opinions, a laugh that demands attention. Growing up, teachers loved her, relatives adored her, strangers remembered her. I was there, the responsible one, the one who didn't need much. If I got good grades, my parents nodded. If Lila barely passed, there were excuses, long talks, and reassurances about her potential. When she changed majors 3 times, it was finding herself. When I stayed late working through college, it was just expected. By adulthood, the pattern was locked in. Lila drifted between jobs, relationships, and ambitions. I built a steady life, and somehow that made me the default solution to every crisis. I helped with rent, just this once. I covered a missed payment until next month. I co-signed when my parents asked because family helps family, right? I met Evan 4 years ago. He's quiet in a grounding way. A landscape architect who notices details most people miss. How light falls, how silence feels. When he proposed, it wasn't flashy. Just a ring, a nervous smile, and him saying, I don't want chaos. I want you. We planned a small wedding. 40 guests. A lakeside lodge with wooden beams and wide windows. Simple food. No spectacle. Just people who mattered. Or so I thought. My parents were lukewarm from the start. It's nice, my mom said. A bit casual. Lila laughed. Very you, she said, which somehow felt like an insult. She announced her engagement 3 months after mine. Bigger ring. Louder celebration. And suddenly everything shifted. My wedding became inconvenient. She insisted on handling certain things, music suggestions, guest coordination, even the welcome brunch. Trust me, she said. I'm better at this stuff. I ignored the tight feeling in my stomach. There were signs. Always signs. She skipped fittings. Busy. Forgot meetings. Lost track of time. Showed up late to my bridal shower wearing white and laughed when people stared. It's not a big deal, she said. You're too sensitive. Evan noticed. I did too. But I kept telling myself the same lie I'd been telling for years. They'll show up when it counts. The morning of the wedding was beautiful. Clear skies. Still water. Sunlight slipping across the lake like a promise. By noon, guests began arriving, friends, coworkers, Evan's family. Smiles. Hugs. Congratulations. But my family's section stayed empty. I told myself they were running late. At 3:40 p.m., I sent Lila a text. "Where are you?" At 3:53, I got her answer. "Relax. No one's showing up." And just like that, everything I had avoided came into focus. They hadn't forgotten. They had chosen. A knock sounded on the door. The coordinator asked gently if we were ready. I looked at my reflection again, at the woman in white who had spent her whole life shrinking to make space for others. I picked up my bouquet. "Yes," I said. "We're ready." Growing up, I always knew Lila got the golden ticket. But it wasn't just the big moments. It was everything. Tiny, invisible cuts that piled up over the years. If I came home with an A on a report card, Mom would glance over her shoulder and murmur, "Good job," while stacking laundry. A small acknowledgement tucked into a task. If Lila got an A, Mom called the relatives, posted it on social media, took 15 photos of her trophy and tagged all the cousins. Everyone clapped online. Everyone celebrated her success. Meanwhile, my wins, if noticed at all, were quiet, almost invisible. And the money, oh, the money. That was the longest, heaviest chain I carried. Lila got her first credit card at 19. She maxed it by the next month. No worry, Mom paid it off. Second job? She skipped days, got fired, and again Mom and Dad covered it. She wanted a lease on a luxury SUV while earning entry-level pay. Did they say no? Of course not. They asked me to co-sign. Just for a year, she promised. Until I get promoted, she twirled her hair and smiled. For years later, I was the one quietly getting the monthly statements, still paying for her choices without complaint, because family helps family, right? I wasn't wealthy. I lived in a small apartment with peeling paint and a creaky floorboard that groaned under every step. My Honda had a persistent rattle, and I meal prepped every Sunday. Every dollar I saved went into a future that wasn't mine, but somehow still tied to them. Weddings, houses, vacations, gifts. Evan saw it. He gently tried to pull me out of the endless cycle. "Naomi, you don't have to do this for them." "It's okay to say no," he said once, stirring pasta in my tiny kitchen. I smiled and waved him off. "It's family. They'll come around." God, how I wish I hadn't believed that. Lila, meanwhile, thrived. The life she led was colorful, dramatic, and always in the spotlight. She didn't just enter rooms, she announced herself. At 23, she moved into her first apartment, fully furnished, thanks to Mom and Dad's help. She went on trips, had spa days, and curated her social media to look effortlessly perfect. Meanwhile, I calculated every bill, every gas refill, every little expense, all while quietly handling my own work-life chaos. There were warnings along the way, tiny, insidious ones that I chose to ignore. She would occasionally borrow wedding funds or deposits under the guise of helping with arrangements, promising to reimburse. And I, trusting as ever did, I trusted she would help create the celebration I had dreamed of. But little by little, it became clear that her idea of helping had more to do with her appearances than my happiness. I remember the night I discovered the cake invoice had been refunded without my knowledge. I stared at the screen in disbelief. $480 gone. No cake. Lila had spent the money elsewhere. "Honestly, no one eats cake at weddings," she shrugged over the phone. And I realized this was an accident. This was intentional. I wanted to scream, to call my parents out, to collapse into tears. But instead I swallowed it. I told myself I'd handle it quietly, just like I always had. Keep the peace. Don't make a scene. It's easier for everyone. By the time the bridal shower rolled around, Lila made another dramatic move. She showed up in an all-white fitted dress, perfectly accessorized as though she was the bride. Guests whispered, friends were confused, and I smiled through the polite greetings. My own happiness felt like a background note, barely audible over the soundtrack of her presence. Daniel noticed the tension, of course. He gently squeezed my hand under the table. "Do you want to just go somewhere?" he whispered. But I forced my smile back into place. I always did. The world doesn't care if you're quietly breaking. Every interaction, every unpaid favor, every stolen spotlight had been building toward this day. And now, standing in the prep room, with my phone buzzing like a warning siren, I could feel the culmination of years of favoritism, entitlement, and manipulation pressing down on me. Lila wasn't just my sister. She was a storm I had always let pass through my life, hoping it wouldn't destroy me. And somehow, against every instinct, I had allowed my family to place themselves squarely behind her, ready to abandon me at the very moment I was supposed to be celebrated. The betrayal wasn't just about the wedding. It was the pattern, the silent message I had been receiving my entire life. My accomplishments, my sacrifices, my careful planning were secondary. Always secondary. And now they weren't coming. I stood there, gripping the bouquet so tightly that my knuckles whitened. My veil felt heavy on my head, my heart heavier in my chest. The countdown was ticking. In less than 10 minutes, I would walk down that aisle with 47 empty chairs awaiting me. I realized then that it wasn't just a wedding day betrayal. It was the culmination of decades of being invisible, of being the support beam while Lila soaked up the applause, and of being expected to quietly accept everything while my own dreams were sidelined. And I decided in that small, cramped prep room that I would not crumble. Not now. Not ever. The lake was calm that morning, the sunlight spilling across the water in soft gold streaks, almost cruel in its serenity. I stood in the small bridal suite, my dress hanging perfectly on a padded hanger, untouched by the chaos that was about to unfold. I had rehearsed every step in my mind, every smile, every word, and yet nothing could have prepared me for what was coming. By 1 p.m., friends and Evan's family had begun to arrive. The air was filled with laughter, the soft clink of glasses, and the smell of fresh flowers that his cousin had carefully arranged. I smiled through the nerves, kissed cheeks, hugged shoulders. The photographer captured it all, the nervous half-smile, the subtle tightening of my jaw, the way my hands trembled, just slightly as I adjusted the bouquet. Then I noticed it, my family's section, empty. 3 rows of polished wooden chairs stood, like ghosts in the sunlight, reserved, pristine and empty. I told myself they were late. Maybe traffic, a last-minute wardrobe issue, something that would explain away this absence. I wanted to believe. I always wanted to believe. At 3:30, the officiant peeked in. "Everything okay?" he asked politely. I smiled and nodded, hoping the tremor in my voice didn't betray the storm inside. By 3:40, the edges of panic had begun to curl into my chest. I glanced at my phone. A single text from Lila. "Relax. No one's coming." I stared at it until the words blurred. My chest felt hollow cold. Not empty, hollow, like the space where trust used to live. And then another buzz. "We're all at my engagement brunch instead." The words sank like stones in a pool. My mind tried to protest, to fight back, but everything slowed down, every heartbeat ringing in my ears. They weren't coming. They had chosen her over me, over my day, over me. Mom's next message arrived. "By the way, I used your card for the full deposit. Pop some more on it if you want everything set up." A pang of anger and disbelief washed over me, but it wasn't loud, dramatic, or fiery. It was cold, quiet, calculating. I put the phone down, gripped my bouquet, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. Hair perfect, makeup flawless, veil slightly askew, eyes wide, bright, alive. A bride, yes, but not a woman abandoned. Not yet. I drew in a breath and squared my shoulders. I had always been the one who kept things together, the fixer, the quiet problem solver, and now, more than ever, I would need every ounce of that calm. At 3:50, I stepped toward the door. Evan appeared, his eyes soft but sharp with concern. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked gently. I nodded. "I am," I said. My voice was level, steady, maybe eerily calm. The lake breeze drifted in as we stepped outside. 47 Guests turned to watch me, their smiles tentative, supportive, sympathetic. And then I looked at the reserved section for my family. Empty. Not one familiar face. I swallowed hard. Not tears, not panic, just recognition. This was the moment that had been building, the moment my life had been quietly preparing me for without my knowledge. My family had shown who they really were, and it wasn't what I had believed. I walked slowly down the aisle, each step deliberate, hand steady, bouquet held high. Guests whispered, some awkwardly, some with pity, but I ignored them. I focused on Evan, standing at the arch, jaw tight, eyes steady on me. The officiant cleared his throat. "You may begin." I took a deep breath and said my vows. 47 pairs of eyes watched. 47 witnesses. Not a single member of my family. And in that moment, standing in sunlight and shadow, I realized that love, real love, didn't need their presence. My vows didn't need their approval. I didn't need their recognition to exist or to matter. After the ceremony, we cut the small emergency cake Evan had ordered at the last minute, just the two of us laughing quietly as the photographer clicked. My family's betrayal was a silent echo in the background, a space I could fill with something new, something entirely mine. That night, still in my wrinkled dress, I sat cross-legged on the hotel bed, my phone open. A single thought came to me. I will make them see. Not through anger, not through screams, but through the truth. I opened my laptop. Evan watched, unsure. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. I didn't answer. Not yet. I clicked record. The webcam light blinked on. There I was, not a picture-perfect bride, not a dramatized victim, just a woman who had spent her life being overlooked, finally holding her voice in her hands. I shared the texts, the receipts, the years of silent support, the favors, the sacrifices, the moments I had been invisible. And I spoke, calm, measured, steady. Not revenge. Clarity. When I finished, I hit copy on the link, opened the family group chat, typed one line. "You'll want to watch this before Grandpa sees it." And then I exhaled, the tension in my chest loosening just a little. For the first time, I felt the edges of control. Not over them, not over their choices, but over me, over my truth, over my voice. The moment I sent the link, my fingers trembled, but not from fear. It was anticipation, the quiet tension of finally letting the weight I'd carried for decades spill into the world. Evan leaned against the bedpost, his hand brushing my shoulder, eyes steady. "You ready for this?" he asked. I nodded. The video didn't need embellishment. I was tired of theatrics, tired of the silent swallowing of injustice. I sat cross-legged, veil half slipped from my hair, lipstick smudged, makeup softening from the heat of the day. I held my bouquet loosely, the edges of the flowers brushing my knees, and spoke calmly. Every word measured, every fact precise. I showed the messages. Lila's betrayal, the family's absence on my wedding day, the engagement brunch they prioritized instead of my vows. I displayed the receipts, the refunded cake invoice, the untracked deposits, the money taken without explanation. I talked about the years of favors quietly given, loans co-signed, invisible work done to stabilize their chaos. And I said something I'd never said aloud before. This isn't revenge. This is clarity. I am done pretending your behavior is normal. I am done covering for you. I am done being invisible. I clicked unlisted, copied the link, and sent it to the family group chat. Just like that, the quiet storm I'd held inside me for decades found its release. At first, there was nothing. A silence I had imagined, anticipating denial, excuses, maybe even anger. Then the notifications began. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. My phone buzzed relentlessly, my heart hammering, my chest tight. "Mom, this is unfair. You shouldn't do this publicly." "Dad, we could have handled this privately." "Lila, you are exaggerating everything. You always do this." But mixed in with the chaos were the voices I hadn't realized I'd missed: validation, acknowledgement, empathy. Cousin Sarah, Naomi, you did the right thing. She's been awful for years. Old friend, I can't believe they treated you like this. You deserve better. Random commenter on Reddit. This is emotional abuse disguised as family tradition. Thank you for sharing your story. I watched, amazed, as strangers understood the invisible pain I had carried. The weight I had tucked away in corners of my mind, the silent exhaustion, the endless attempts to please, suddenly had witnesses. People saw it. People believed it. The video went viral faster than I expected. From a few hundred views, it shot into the thousands, then millions. Comment sections overflowed with heartbreak, anger, solidarity, and support. Imagine skipping your sister's wedding for an engagement brunch. This is jealousy, plain and simple, someone wrote. Another, Naomi, you are braver than you know. Thank you for showing us what favoritism really looks like. Evan watched beside me, quiet and steady. See, he said softly, people understand. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. You're telling the truth. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel it: validation. Not the hollow praise that had come from my family on occasion, but real acknowledgement, the kind that resonates deep in your bones. Then the floodgates opened from inside the family. Dad called. Mom sent messages after messages. Lila's Instagram went private. My extended relatives argued in Facebook threads, taking sides, defending, condemning, shouting through pixels and Wi-Fi signals. I didn't respond. I didn't justify. I didn't defend. Instead, I let it be. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat back on the couch, and let the storm rage around me while I remained unshaken. Somewhere in the middle of it all, my grandfather called. He never called me directly, not unless it was necessary. Naomi. His voice was low, hesitant, almost trembling. I watched it. I froze. I'm sorry, I whispered automatically. Old habits die slowly. Don't apologize, he said firmly. Not for this. You deserved celebration, not neglect. You deserved to be seen. I felt warmth rise in my chest, a strange, overwhelming relief. Grandpa, always blunt, always steady, was acknowledging me, truly acknowledging me. For the first time in my life, someone in my family chose me, not Lila, not appearances, but me. Later, the video continued to ripple outward. News outlets picked it up. Creators on TikTok stitched clips of me speaking, calling it a raw, real story about favoritism and neglect. Evan sat beside me, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief, occasionally laughing quietly at absurd comments online. Through it all, I didn't cry. Not yet. I felt a strange, icy clarity. The betrayal had been sharp, brutal, and public, but so was the power it gave me. By the end of the day, I realized the final truth. The world could see my story, understand my pain, and still respect me. My family could react however they wanted, but I was no longer bound by their choices or approval. I had found my voice. I had found my clarity. And I knew, deep in my chest, that nothing would ever make me shrink again. The next morning, my phone felt like a bomb, vibrating incessantly on the nightstand. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of texts. My family, finally realizing they couldn't ignore the video, were erupting in chaos. Lila's messages were furious, defensive, and insulting. You humiliated me. You're exaggerating everything. This isn't fair. I didn't reply. Not a single word. Mom tried the emotional manipulation route. Irma, this is destroying our family. You need to take responsibility for your actions. Responsibility? I had spent my entire life taking responsibility for everything they ever did wrong, and now, for the first time, I was refusing. Dad's texts with a classic middleman rhetoric. Naomi, we could have handled this privately. You didn't need to go public. Yes, we could have if I'd spent decades swallowing my pain and erasing myself for their comfort. But I hadn't. I wouldn't. And slowly, one by one, the dominoes fell in a pattern I hadn't expected. Extended family began picking sides. Some supported Lila, some me. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years commented, shared, or messaged directly to validate my experience. Random strangers sent DMs. "I can't believe they treated you this way. You deserve so much better." It was overwhelming, chaotic yet oddly cleansing. Each message, each comment, each view of the video reminded me that I had truth on my side. And truth, I realized, carried power. By mid-afternoon, my grandfather called again. I could hear him shuffling in his living room, a deep, gravelly sound that always meant seriousness. "Naomi," he said softly, "I watched everything. I am proud of you. You did exactly what needed to be done. You don't have to apologize, not for them, not for anyone." Tears stung my eyes, not from sadness but from relief. Someone, a single person in my family, recognized me, chose me, celebrated me. That recognition, even from one voice, carried more weight than decades of silent sacrifice. From that moment, I knew what had to happen next. The boundaries I had avoided for so long were no longer negotiable. I would not tolerate theft, manipulation, or favoritism. I would not allow my happiness to be dependent on anyone who treated me as optional. I called Evan into the room, taking his hand in mine. "I'm done," I said simply. "Done pretending everything is fine. Done covering for them. Done being invisible." He squeezed my hand, nodding. "Then let's make sure nothing can pull you back." I drafted a message, not just to my parents, but to my sister, extended relatives, anyone who had actively or passively harmed me over the years. A few sentences, firm, clear, non-apologetic. "I am no longer available to manage your crises, your drama, or your decisions. I am prioritizing my life and my marriage. This is not a request. This is a boundary." I hit send. The silence afterward was almost deafening. No replies, no immediate retaliation. Just stillness. And for the first time, the stillness felt like a blessing, not a punishment. Over the next few weeks, the fallout continued, but I was untouchable in a sense I hadn't felt before. Lila tried to reach me, but I ignored her calls and messages. Mom's texts went unanswered. Dad stopped calling entirely. The weight lifted slowly, like lifting a heavy cloak off my shoulders. Evan and I used that space to rebuild, to create our own rituals, our own celebrations. Quiet dinners, spontaneous hikes, early mornings where we drank coffee on the balcony while the city was still asleep. We laughed about small failures, shared silly stories, and slowly wove a life that belonged only to us. And then, 3 months after the wedding disaster, we did something small but meaningful. A backyard ceremony. Not grand, not viral, not about appearances. String lights, tacos from a food truck that insisted on helping after seeing the video, our closest friends. Just us. A night that felt like a proper beginning. When Evan read his vows again, he added one line that made me laugh through tears. "I'm grateful your family didn't show up that day because it showed us who wasn't meant to stay and who was." I had wanted their validation my entire life, but in that moment I realized it was never necessary. I didn't need approval. I didn't need acknowledgement. I needed only the people who truly loved me, and Evan was the first and only person whose presence was unconditional. By the end of the night, as we danced under the fairy lights, sipping warm drinks and laughing until our faces hurt, I felt a calm I had never known. My family's absence, once a source of pain, had transformed into clarity, empowerment, and freedom. I didn't hate them. Not entirely, but I had no illusions anymore. Love that is conditional or selective isn't love. I had survived their favoritism, their betrayal, and their neglect, and I was whole. And as Evan kissed my forehead, whispering softly, "We're okay. We're exactly where we're supposed to be," I understood. Life wasn't about the people who failed you. It was about the life you built afterward and the peace you claimed for yourself. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, painting the apartment walls with pale gold stripes. Evan was still asleep beside me, his steady breathing a comforting rhythm against the chaos that had once ruled my life. I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone silent for the first time in days, and let myself simply breathe. It had been almost a year since the wedding fiasco. My parents hadn't reached out in months. Lila had blocked me on everything. And yet, the world had shifted in ways I hadn't imagined possible. My video continued to be watched, shared, and discussed, but now it was no longer a source of stress. It was a testament, a marker of truth that reminded me of the strength I had carried all along. I walked to the living room, the sunlight warming the floorboards. The string lights we'd hung for our backyard do-over still sparkled faintly, their reflection caught in the window. I smiled softly, thinking about that night, the tacos, the laughter, the friends who had come to celebrate only us. For the first time, I realized that celebration had never truly needed my family. Evan stretched, rubbing his eyes, and smiled when he saw me. "Morning," he said. His voice held a kind of quiet joy that I hadn't known existed before our life together became truly ours. "Morning," I whispered, feeling the tension in my shoulders finally release. Over the next few weeks, we continued to build our life intentionally. We spent mornings hiking through quiet trails, evenings cooking elaborate meals together, nights curled up reading or watching films. The apartment, once a neutral, almost forgettable space, became ours in every sense. Every corner reflected our shared choices and laughter. Every photo, every item on a shelf, reminded me that I was no longer invisible. I kept the wedding photo on the kitchen wall, not the idealized, polished image, but the one that told the real story. Me, dancing under the lights, the empty chairs visible in the background, Evan holding me steady. It wasn't sadness. It was liberation. Every glance at that photo reminded me that even in abandonment, I had claimed my life. Family occasionally tried to reconnect. Aunts, uncles, and cousins sent messages, some apologetic, others defensive. But I responded only when it felt necessary, and only to assert my boundaries. The pattern was clear. Some people were capable of growth, others weren't. I had learned to accept that. I no longer needed everyone's approval to feel whole. Grandpa called occasionally, always with warmth and wisdom. "Remember," he said, "people will show you who they are. Believe them the first time. Don't waste your life apologizing for their choices." His voice, steady and certain, anchored me. It had always been a rare comfort, but now it felt like a compass pointing me toward clarity. I began focusing on my own pursuits again, my work, my hobbies, and even small personal projects I had postponed. The YouTube channel grew steadily, but more importantly, it gave me a platform to speak my truth when I needed it, not as a shield for anyone else's behavior, but as an expression of my own voice. Evan and I talked about the future, our plans for a quiet life filled with ordinary joy. A small house somewhere with green space, maybe a dog, the freedom to wake up without checking notifications, without anticipating someone else's drama. We laughed at how simple, how ordinary, and yet how profoundly satisfying it all felt. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sun dip below the horizon, Evan took my hand. "You've done something remarkable," he said softly. "You've taken control of your life, and you've done it without losing yourself." I smiled, squeezing his hand. It wasn't easy, I admitted, but I finally understand what freedom feels like. Not the absence of people, but the presence of people who matter, and the absence of those who don't. And in that moment, I realized the ultimate truth. Life wasn't about the people who had failed me, nor the hurt they had caused. Life was about the courage to let go, to protect your peace, and to nurture the love that was genuine and unwavering. Months passed. I wore a wedding ring not as a symbol of my family's approval, but as a reminder of my choice, my vows, and the life Evan and I had built together. Friends celebrated our little milestones. Strangers continued to reach out with support and empathy. And through it all, I remained grounded in the knowledge that I had survived not by chance, but by standing firm in my truth. Looking back at the day of the wedding, the memory of 47 empty chairs no longer hurt. Instead, it became a symbol of liberation, the exact push I had needed to claim my life fully, unapologetically, and with clarity. Sometimes, I still scroll through the comments on the video. Bravery in the face of neglect. This is what self-respect looks like. I read each one with a quiet smile. Yes, that is exactly what it is. Bravery, truth, self-respect. Evan wraps an arm around my shoulders, resting his chin atop my head. We're okay, right? He murmurs. Yes, I whisper. We're more than okay. We're free. The future stretches ahead, open and uncharted. But for the first time, I face it without fear, without obligation, without guilt. And I know this truth will carry me forward. I survived. I endured. I reclaimed my voice. And nothing, no family, no betrayal, no past injustice, will ever take it from me again. We turned away from the balcony, the city lights twinkling like distant stars, and stepped into our life. Quiet, authentic, and entirely ours. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I smiled not because someone else noticed me, but because I finally saw myself.